The cafe on Maple Street. The rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee swirled through the air, mingling with the faint scent of warm pastries. Sunlight streamed through the cafe windows, casting a golden glow on the wooden tables where familiar faces sat, some laughing, some lost in thought, but all at peace. Linda wiped down the counter, her fingers grazing the smooth surface that she had once sanded and polished by hand. This cafe was more than a business. It was her sanctuary, a place she had built from nothing, a place that had saved her. She glanced around, watching as an elderly man stirred his coffee with unhurried patience, as a young couple whispered over lattes, their hands brushing, their eyes full of love. Once upon a time, she had been them. Once upon a time, she'd believed in forever. She closed her eyes for just a moment, allowing herself to drift back to a life that felt like a different lifetime. A life where she had been someone's wife, where she had been married to Tom, the man who had once looked at her as if she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. She could still remember the way he used to pull her close on cold mornings, pressing lazy kisses to her temple, whispering how lucky he was, the way he would trace soft patterns on her back as they lay in bed, talking about their future, dreaming about the family they would build together. Back then, she had thought love like that lasted forever. But love, at least the kind she had with Tom, was not meant to last. It had withered, slowly, painfully, until all that remained were cold silences, sharp words, and the aching loneliness of sleeping beside someone who no longer reached for her. Linda opened her eyes, exhaling softly. That life was over now, and in its place, she had found something better, a life that was hers, and hers alone. With a small smile, she adjusted the cafe's display case, ready for the afternoon rush. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was thriving. Linda had always believed in fairy tale love, and for a while, that's exactly what she had with Tom. He was her rock, her safe place, her greatest love. She could still remember the night she told him she was pregnant. Her hands trembled as she held up the test, her heart pounding. "Tom, we're having a baby." For a moment, he just stared. Then, his face lit up with the purest joy she had ever seen. He lifted her off the ground, spinning her in the air as laughter filled their tiny apartment. "A baby? Are you serious? Linda, this is amazing." He kissed her over and over, whispering, "I love you," between each breath. That night, they lay in bed, dreaming about the future, about baby names, about tiny hands gripping their fingers, about bedtime stories and lullabies. "You are going to be the most beautiful mother," Tom had said, tracing soft circles on her stomach. "I'll be here for everything, every step, every kick. I promise you that." Linda had never felt so loved, so sure that she had found her forever. At first, Tom was true to his word. He was attentive, caring, endlessly loving. He brought her breakfast in bed, massaged her aching feet, pressed his lips against her belly, and whispered, "Hey, little one, I can't wait to meet you." When morning sickness hit her hard, he held her hair back, rubbing her back as she leaned over the toilet. "You're doing amazing, babe. This is just part of the journey." When she cried over silly things, commercials, a burnt batch of cookies, not being able to reach her own shoes, he laughed, but in that sweet, adoring way, pulling her close and kissing her forehead. "You're glowing," he'd whisper. "I'm the luckiest man alive." But somewhere along the way, something shifted. At first, it was subtle. The lingering looks he used to give her, those looks full of admiration, of love, became something else, something colder. The first time it happened, she had just finished getting dressed, pulling on one of his old hoodies, when she caught him staring. "What?" she asked, smiling. He hesitated, then shook his head. "Nothing. You used to dress up more, that's all." It was small, insignificant, and yet it stung. Then the comments became sharper. "You should try to take better care of yourself, Linda. You're gaining weight fast. Are you sure you're eating healthy?" She tried to laugh it off, pushing through the hurt that tightened in her chest. "Tom, I'm carrying our baby. Of course I'm gaining weight, but it didn't stop. You don't even try anymore. You used to care about your hair, your makeup. Now you just throw on anything. Look at your stomach. Stretch marks everywhere. Where's the woman I married?" Every word landed like a slap, cutting her in places he couldn't see. She started checking herself in the mirror more, pinching the skin on her arms, pulling at her clothes, sucking in her stomach, even when she knew it wouldn't change anything. She stopped asking for back rubs, stopped complaining when her feet ached, stopped seeking his touch, because every time she did, he would pull away, subtly, like he didn't want her to notice. But she did notice. The love in his eyes was disappearing, replaced by something else. Disappointment, maybe even disgust. And she couldn't understand why. She was creating life, their baby, the child they had dreamed of. Why did she feel like she was losing him instead of growing their family? The nights were the worst. The silence stretched between them, cold and unyielding, like an invisible wall that hadn't always been there but had somehow become unbreakable. Linda would lie beside him, staring at the ceiling, her hands resting on the gentle curve of her stomach, the place where their child grew. There was a time when Tom had worshipped that same space, when he used to press his palm against her belly, laughing every time he felt the smallest flutter of movement, when he used to kiss her skin and whisper promises to the life they had created together. "Hey, little one, I can't wait to meet you. Your mom is amazing, you know that." She had felt safe in those moments, wrapped in the warmth of his love. But now his touch was gone. He barely even looked at her. Some nights, she would reach for his hand, searching, begging, for even the smallest trace of the man he used to be. And every time he turned away, pretending to be asleep, pretending not to notice. She tried to tell herself it was just exhaustion, that maybe work had drained him, that maybe tomorrow he would pull her close again. But tomorrow always came, and nothing changed. So she stopped trying. She stopped bringing up the baby names they had once stayed up all night debating. Stopped telling him about the tiny kicks she felt during the day. Stopped trying to pull him back into the love they once shared. Because deep down, she already knew the truth. She just didn't have the strength to hear it out loud. Because if she asked him, "Do you still love me?" she wasn't sure he would say yes. It happened on an ordinary evening, but the moment itself was anything but ordinary. She had been watching him across the room, as she often did these days, searching for something, anything, that would remind her of the man she used to know. And then she saw it, saw him, his gaze lingering just a second too long on another woman. A woman who wasn't exhausted from sleepless nights. A woman who didn't flinch every time she stepped on swollen feet. A woman who still fit into her old clothes, who still carried herself with the confidence she had long since lost. And the worst part? The way he looked at her. The way his eyes softened. The way his lips curved into a small secret smile. The way he used to look at her. Something inside her snapped. She excused herself, walked away as calmly as she could. But the moment she locked the bathroom door behind her, her hands began to shake. She turned to the mirror, her own reflection staring back at her like a stranger. Her face, tired, drained, hollow. Her eyes, dull, empty, so different from the woman she once was. Her body, marked, stretched, changed beyond recognition. She ran a trembling hand over her belly, tracing the scars that told the story of the life growing inside her. And then, for the first time, she said it out loud. "Where did I go?" Her voice was barely more than a whisper, but it felt deafening. Because for the first time, she realized the truth. The thing she had been too afraid to admit. She wasn't just losing him, she was losing herself. And Tom? Tom didn't even care. When their son, Noah, was born, Linda thought this was it. The missing piece of her happiness, the final puzzle that would make everything feel whole again. But happiness wasn't what she found. Exhaustion, isolation, a loneliness so deep it threatened to swallow her whole. The nights and days blurred into an endless loop, feeding, changing, rocking, soothing. No sleep, no time to eat, no time to breathe. Her body was no longer her own. It belonged to a tiny human who needed her every second of every day, leaving nothing for herself. And Tom, he was nowhere to be found. At first, he played the role of the caring husband. "You're doing great, babe," he would murmur absent-mindedly, barely glancing at her as his fingers scrolled across his phone screen. "Try to get some rest." Rest. She wanted to laugh, a bitter, hollow laugh. Because when? Between the 2-hour feedings that left her body aching, between the screaming fits that made her feel like she was losing her mind, between rocking a colicky baby at 3 a.m., whispering lullabies into the darkness while Tom lay beside her, completely undisturbed, she tried to be patient, tried to give him time to adjust. But soon, his excuses became routine. "Work's been crazy. I need to stay late. I'll help on the weekend, I promise. You've got this, right? I mean, you're home all day, as if she were on vacation, as if she weren't trapped in the walls of their house, with a newborn who wouldn't stop crying, and a body that felt foreign, stretched, broken, as if she weren't drowning while he got to escape. And the worst part? She let him sleep. She let him leave. She let him believe that this, their child, their family, their life, was just her responsibility. Until one night, when everything snapped. Noah had been crying for what felt like hours. Linda had tried everything: feeding, rocking, swaying, humming soft lullabies, with a voice so hoarse it barely sounded like her own anymore. Nothing worked. Her arms trembled from exhaustion, her legs weak from pacing back and forth. But still, she held on. She had no choice. Noah's cries pierced through the night like a siren. Yet beside her, Tom slept, peacefully, not a flinch, not a stir, like he didn't hear a thing, like he didn't care. Something inside her snapped. She turned to him, rage bubbling in her chest, tightening around her ribs like a vice. How could he sleep through this? How could he leave her alone in this? How could he not see that she was breaking? She reached out and shoved his shoulder, hard. "Tom, wake up," he groaned, rolling away from her, pulling the blanket up like her suffering was an inconvenience. "Linda, what the hell? Get up, help me." Her voice shook with exhaustion, anger, desperation. Noah's cries filled the room, but Tom barely opened his eyes. "He'll stop eventually," he muttered, voice sluggish. "Just let him cry." Linda felt like she had been punched in the stomach. "Let him cry," she whispered, her voice trembling. "He's our son, Tom. He needs us." Tom sighed heavily, rubbing his temples as if she were the one giving him a headache. "No, Linda, he needs you." And with that, he rolled over and went back to sleep. Linda stood there, staring at the back of his head, her pulse pounding in her ears. Something inside her shattered. She clutched Noah closer, pressing her lips to his tiny forehead, tears streaming down her face, not from exhaustion, but from something worse. Realization. She was already alone. The only difference now, she was done pretending otherwise. Tom used to rush home to her like she was the best part of his day. She remembered it so clearly. The way he would step through the door, grinning like he couldn't wait another second to hold her, wrapping her in his arms before she could even say hello. Now he came home late, irritated, distracted, or worse, he didn't come home at all. And when he did, he barely looked at her. "God, this house is a mess," he muttered one night, stepping over a pile of unfolded laundry, shaking his head in disgust. Linda stood in the middle of the room, Noah crying in her arms, her body aching from a day spent rocking, feeding, pacing, fighting to keep herself together. She hadn't showered, she hadn't eaten, she had barely even sat down, and all he saw was the mess. Her lips parted slightly, the words sitting heavy on her tongue. "I haven't even had time to brush my hair, Tom. Do you really think I care about laundry?" She expected him to soften, to see the exhaustion in her face, to hear the pain behind her words. But he didn't. He let out a bitter laugh, running a hand through his hair. "So what, Linda? You just gave up?" Her breath caught in her throat. You used to take care of yourself. You used to take care of me. Now it's just the baby. What about me, Linda? Something inside her snapped. She felt it break, like a dam collapsing under the weight of everything she had been holding back. For a split second, 1,000 words fought to escape. What about you, Tom? Have you ever changed a single diaper? Have you ever stayed up all night, rocking him back to sleep, feeling like you were losing your mind? Do you even know what exhaustion feels like? The kind where your body aches, your head spins, and you forget what day it is. I am drowning, Tom, and all you can think about is yourself. She wanted to scream it. She wanted to throw something, shake him, force him to see her, to see what she was going through. But she didn't. Instead, she just turned away. Because at that moment, she realized the truth. He wasn't listening. He never had been. And she was done trying to make him hear her. The night stretched on, endless and unforgiving. Noah's cries pierced through the walls, an exhausted, desperate wail that Linda had long since memorized. She rocked him in her arms, whispering soft reassurances, her voice hoarse from exhaustion. "Shh, baby, mommy's here. It's okay. It's okay." But it wasn't okay. Her arms ached. Her body trembled. She hadn't slept in days, hadn't had a moment to breathe without worry clawing at her chest. She was falling apart, and Tom, her husband, her partner, the man who once swore to love her through anything, was right there. And yet, he might as well have been 1,000 miles away. She turned to him, her hands trembling as she reached out. "Please, Tom," she whispered, shaking his arm. "Just this once. Please, I need you to take him." He groaned, rolling onto his stomach, pulling the blanket higher. "Just let him cry, Linda. He'll fall asleep eventually." Linda froze. "He needs us, Tom." Tom let out a frustrated sigh, not even opening his eyes. "No, he needs you." Then, just like that, he drifted back to sleep, his breathing slow and steady, completely untouched by the chaos unraveling around him. Something inside her shattered. This wasn't just exhaustion. This was abandonment. She stood there, staring at the man who once promised to stand beside her, feeling the crushing weight of reality settle on her chest. She was already alone, and the most painful part, she had been for a long time. She had tried. She had swallowed the exhaustion, the loneliness, the gut-wrenching feeling that she was nothing more than a shadow in her own home. She had hoped, prayed that things would change. But hope had a cruel way of keeping people trapped. One evening, after Noah finally drifted off to sleep, Linda walked into the kitchen, rubbing the ache from her temples. That's when she heard it. Tom laughing. It wasn't just any laugh. It was the kind of laugh she hadn't heard in months. Light, easy, full of warmth. And it wasn't meant for her. She stopped in the doorway, watching as he leaned against the counter. A lazy smile stretched across his face, his fingers flying across his phone screen. "What's so funny?" she asked, forcing her voice to stay light. He barely looked up, just texting a friend. A chill ran down her spine. Linda knew that tone. Distant, guarded. She had ignored her instincts before, had convinced herself she was just being overly sensitive, too emotional, too drained to think straight. But not this time. Later that night, when Tom stepped into the shower, leaving his phone on the nightstand, her hands hovered over it. Her heart pounded. "This is wrong, Linda. You shouldn't be checking his phone." But something deep in her gut told her that if she didn't, she would never forgive herself. She picked it up, and there it was. Hundreds of messages. From a woman named Sophie. "You're so much fun, Tom. I love our time together. I can't wait to see you again tonight." She has no idea, does she? Linda felt the ground tilt beneath her, her breath caught in her throat, her hands trembling violently as she scrolled through the endless proof of his betrayal. Dates, secret meetings, messages dripping with intimacy, excitement, passion. The very things she had begged for. Her entire body felt like it had been set on fire, but she couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't even cry. By the time Tom stepped out of the bathroom, towel wrapped around his waist, she was still standing there, gripping his phone like it was the only thing tethering her to reality. She turned to him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Who is she?" Tom froze. And then, to her utter disbelief, he sighed. Not in guilt, not in regret, in annoyance. "Linda, you're overreacting. Overreacting. Overreacting." Her hands clenched around the phone. The proof was right there, and yet he still tried to gaslight her, dismiss her, make her feel like she was crazy. "You've been so busy with the baby. I needed someone to talk to." Linda stared at him, the words sinking deep into her skin, cutting her in places she didn't know could bleed. "Talking," she echoed, her voice shaking. The air left her lungs as she realized something. This wasn't just cheating. This was a choice. A choice he had made over and over, every time he picked up his phone and texted another woman instead of checking on her. Every time he stayed out late instead of coming home to help put Noah to sleep. Every time he looked at Linda with nothing but resentment while looking at Sophie with adoration. This was deliberate, and that was the worst betrayal of all. For the first time, she didn't swallow her pain. For the first time, she let herself feel it. "I've been doing everything," she whispered, her voice raw. "Raising our son, keeping this home together, holding on to whatever is left of us. And this is what you do." Tom rolled his eyes. "Maybe if you looked like you used to, things would be different." The world went silent. The last thread holding her together snapped. And just like that, she was done. Done waiting. Done pleading. Done begging for a man who had already left her behind. The Tom she loved no longer existed. And Linda, she had wasted enough of her life pretending otherwise. "I can't wait to see you again tonight." She has no idea, does she? Linda's hands shook as she scrolled through the endless proof of his betrayal. When Tom stepped out of the bathroom, she held up the phone, her voice barely above a whisper. "Who is she?" he sighed, as if he were annoyed rather than ashamed. "Linda, you're overreacting. You've been so busy with the baby. I needed someone to talk to." Linda felt the air leave her lungs. "Talking, that's what you call this." For the first time, she stood up for herself. "I've been doing everything, raising our son, keeping this home together. While you've been out with her, you don't even look at me anymore." Tom rolled his eyes. "Maybe if you looked like you used to, things would be different." That was it. The moment Linda knew she was done. She had spent too long waiting for him to love her again. But the man she loved was already gone. Linda left that night with nothing but a single duffel bag, a crying baby, and a heart that had been shattered beyond recognition. She didn't know where she was going. She had no plan, no money, no safety net. All she knew was that if she stayed, she would disappear entirely. The streets were dark, the air cold against her tear-streaked face as she walked away from the life she had spent years building, a life that had turned into a prison. Noah whimpered in her arms, his tiny fingers clutching at her shirt as if he could sense the storm raging inside her. "Shh, baby, it's okay," she whispered, pressing a trembling kiss to his forehead. But it wasn't okay. She was scared, she was alone, but she was free. And then, like a beacon in the night, a familiar porch light flickered in the distance. Margaret's house. Margaret had always been more than just a neighbor. She was a retired school teacher, a woman with a sharp mind and an even sharper heart, who had once told Linda, a woman who loses herself in a man was never truly loved by him. That night, when Linda knocked on her door, Margaret took one look at her, the dark circles under her eyes, the way she clutched Noah like a lifeline, and said nothing. She just opened her arms. Linda collapsed into them, sobbing in the way she hadn't allowed herself to before, sobbing for the love she lost, for the years she wasted, for the woman she used to be. Margaret held her tight, rocking her like she was the child in need of comfort. "You were never the problem, sweetheart," she murmured, her voice soft but firm. "That man lost the best thing in his life." Linda wanted to believe her, but believing in herself That would take time. Linda couldn't stay forever. She knew that. Margaret never made her feel like a burden. But Linda wasn't the kind of woman who could live off someone else's kindness. She needed to stand on her own 2 feet. One evening, as she was unpacking the few belongings she had, a notebook fell from her bag. It was old, the pages worn and slightly crumpled, filled with half-written ideas and scribbled dreams. A cafe, a small cozy place where people could escape, where she could escape. She had once poured her heart into this dream, only to let it collect dust under the weight of a loveless marriage. But maybe it was time to try again. "I think I want to open a cafe," she whispered to Margaret one night, over a cup of tea. Margaret didn't blink. She just nodded, sipping her drink. "Then do it," Linda laughed, shaking her head. "I don't even have enough money to buy groceries, let alone rent a place." Margaret set her cup down and leaned forward. "You don't need much to start, just enough to believe in yourself." Linda swallowed the lump in her throat. She had nothing left to lose, so she took a leap of faith. She scraped together every last cent she had, worked odd jobs, picked up shifts at a local diner, and when she finally had just enough, she found a tiny storefront on Maple Street. It wasn't much. The floors were scratched, the walls needed paint, and the kitchen was small, but it was hers. She painted the walls herself, hung up old family recipes on the bulletin board, and spent nights baking until her fingers ached and her heart felt full again. Her first customers were just neighbors, people who stopped by out of curiosity. But then word spread. Soon, Linda's cafe became the heart of the town, a place where people came not just for coffee and pastries, but for warmth, for community, for stories. And for the first time in years, Linda felt alive again. One quiet afternoon, as she wiped down the counter, the bell above the door jingled. She looked up, ready to greet a customer, and froze. Standing in the doorway was Tom, the man who had broken her, the man who had once called her beautiful, only to later call her nothing. But he didn't look like the man she used to know. His once pristine suit was wrinkled, his eyes hollow with exhaustion. There was no arrogance in his posture, no self-assured smirk, just tiredness, just regret. "Linda," he said, his voice softer than she remembered. "Can we talk?" She took a deep breath, crossing her arms, her stance strong. "About what?" Tom sighed, running a hand through his unkempt hair. "I messed up," he admitted. "I know that now." Linda said nothing, waiting. "Sophie, she left me," he continued, his voice tinged with bitterness. "I thought she was different, but she only cared about the fun, not the real stuff. And Noah, I miss him. I miss us." For a fleeting moment, something inside her stirred. Not love, not longing, just the remnants of a life she once held close. But then, she remembered everything. The nights she lay awake, waiting for him to come home. The tears that stained her pillow as she rocked their son alone. The way he made her feel invisible, unworthy, disposable. And suddenly, that flicker of emotion, gone. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. "Tom, I spent so long trying to make you happy, trying to be enough, but I was never the problem." His throat bobbed as he swallowed hard, sensing what was coming. "I built this life on my own," she continued, her voice unwavering. "I found happiness without you, and I'm not going back." Tom exhaled sharply, defeated. "Can I at least see Noah?" he asked, his voice almost pleading. Linda considered it. Finally, she nodded. "You can visit him. But the life I have now, you're not part of it." Tom's shoulders slumped, and for a moment, she almost felt sorry for him. Almost. As he turned and walked out the door, something inside Linda lifted. Like the last weight had been taken off her chest. Like she could finally breathe again. She exhaled, feeling lighter than she had in years. Then, with a small smile, she turned back to the counter, picked up a fresh tray of cookies, and greeted the next customer. Because her life was beautiful again. Moral of the story: never lose yourself just to hold on to someone who doesn't appreciate you. Your worth isn't defined by their eyes, but by your own. When one door closes, don't be afraid. Another door will open, but only if you have the courage to step forward. You are stronger than you think. Happiness doesn't come from someone else. It is ignited from within your own heart.